As more people filter in, we'll let them into the room so they can join us as well. But just to get started, we always like to do just a quick check-in to see how everyone's doing. So I'm sure you can all see our fun sheep on our screen here. So if you could take a look at the different pictures of sheep and let us know if any of these sheep reflect how you're feeling today. If you know how to use the annotate and you want to put a stamp next to one of them, you can. Otherwise, feel free to speak up and you can choose any of the sheep that you see here.
And the annotate is like my new favorite function. So I'm always obsessed with telling people about it. So if you go up to the top of the screen, it should say something like you're seeing Amber's screen right now. If you click up there, a menu will come up and you can choose the little annotate. It looks like a pencil. I know sometimes that doesn't work on all devices. So if you don't see that, feel free to just verbalize. But when you click on the annotate, it'll let you either use a stamp or you can draw or you can write. I'll just put my name right there. Show that I'm feeling like I'm a 4.
It looks like we have one in the chat too. Christy, you said you're a 5?
Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna go, let me put my little stamp here too.
Oh, little content sheep. So I'll give a little disclaimer. I know I'm feeling like a 4. I have something going on with my ear. It feels like just one ear is clogged. So my hearing in this ear keeps kind of going in and out. So if my volume is all over the place, I apologize in advance. What about you, Doris and Christy? Why do the 5 and the 6 resonate with you all?
Okay, well, the 6 comes, I mean, I'm not seeing the annotate, but if it's working, it's great for me. I don't know, I feel good today. It's snowing for one thing, and I'm a winter person. So anytime it snows, my mood's always elevated. It's always good. I'm one of the few people. If you don't like the snow, call me, I'll make you happy, you know.
I was gonna say, I normally hear a little bit of the opposites.
I am, well, that's me, what can I say?
Nice. I know I picked number 2 mainly because it's snowing and I always like being inside in the warm when it's snowing. I'm just glad that I'm not outside. I'm cozy in my home.
Ayla, I'll come cheer you up anytime.
Thank you. And Christy, I don't know if we lost you. I don't see you.
Oh, I am charging.
Charging.
I'm
gotcha.
so sorry. I give piano lessons and I was on here. It takes a lot of juice. And so just for a little minute, I'm going to try to get it up a little bit and then I'll be on.
Gotcha.
Okay.
But it sounds like you can hear us, right?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful.
Okay.
Wonderful.
I wanted to ask why you picked number 5.
Why I picked number 5? Can you see my green scribble on it?
We
I can
can,
see
yeah.
that. Yep.
That was me trying to do the annotated because I never done it before. That's pretty cool. I learned something.
Isn't that fun?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very fun. Well, I was up early because of lessons. We start at 8:40 because of their school schedule. And, it was kind of that morning where I just wanted to, stay in my warm bed. So that one kind of seemed like me.
Gotcha.
All right.
Okay, I'm going to clear the drawings. Thank you, everyone. And so what I have to be like really, you guys going to see my thinking face. I have found that if I try to do this too quickly, I mess up the slides. So one at a time, I'm going to do this and make sure my annotating is stopped so I don't write on the slide. But I think, we can definitely let folks in as they join if more folks are able to join us, but being mindful of you all's time and that you're here, I think we should go ahead and get started. So Ayla, I will stop talking and let you lead us through the intro exercise.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. So just for our quick introductions, we'd like to get to know, who's joining us today, and we're going to ask if you can introduce yourselves and let us know what you're hoping to get out of today's training. So I will start us off. My name is Ayla. I'm the older adult specialist with the Colorado Spirit team. And I enjoy being a part of this training because I love working with this population and I love giving information and support to the community. So I'm excited to be here. I am going to pick on people to share with us. So Doris, I will start with you. If you could share with us what you hope to get out of our training today.
Okay, I don't know much about you, I have to say. And I was just interested. It's a difficult time. And in some respects, for some of us, we've had a little more of a challenge than others. And I was just looking to see what information you had to offer.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming today. Christy, if you could share with us what you hope to get out of our training today.
Yes, let's see. Let's see here. I worked in special education. I'm a retired educator, and much of my career was spent with the emotionally disturbed population. And so I'm always interested in mental health topics. And then personally, as Doris said, it is a difficult time and it is isolating. I live by myself. I have kids nearby, but we don't spend a ton of time together, and we really try to be careful. The kids are in daycare and some of the kids have been exposed to COVID and they've had to quarantine. And so, yeah, I think it's always a good thing to have more ideas and information in your toolbox.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Amber,
can,
I'll pass it off to you.
oh, sorry, this is Shannon. I'll just go ahead and just let you know too that I'm listening as I'm working, but love any suggestions, ideas, help, feedback for this population. Doris and Christy, I was talking to Ayla and Amber before we got on. It's just so sad to see how some of the seniors have just declined so rapidly.
Yeah.
So anything to help them. A lot of them don't know how to work Zoom. So we're putting these recordings up on our YouTube channel so they can go watch it. Sometimes they'll call us and say, can you just send us a link? And it's easy for them to click right in. And yeah, so any ideas to help and keep that social connection happening.
Hey, thank you. Amber, I'll give it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for sharing what you hope to get out of this. You will hear me say several times today that the information we're going to present is probably not rocket science for anyone. Like none of this is probably going to strike you as brand new. What I think is really beneficial about this training is our ability to kind of put it all together and then to connect together as a group and to be able to share, this is something that I found helpful, or this is something that Ayla and I were talking about the other day that we noticed, and really being able to think through how does this apply, especially during a pandemic. I'm used to doing some of this kind of support in person with people. So transitioning to doing everything remotely is a shift for me too. So I think the more that we know what people are interested in getting, what brought you here today, the more we can kind of tailor our discussions to that. So thank you both. So my name is Amber, and I am also with the Colorado Spirit program at All Health Network. We'll share a little bit of information about our program at the end, but our short version is that we are a grant-funded program to be able to be a very flexible community support for people about the stress that we're all experiencing in very different ways related to the pandemic. So we can do things like we're doing today, trainings. We can provide individual check-ins and conversations. We can do group support. We can send materials out in writing. We have kind of the ability to really be a short-term resource for the community. And because we're grant funded, everything we do is free. So if there are things that would be helpful, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. So I'm just excited to be able to share this information with you. This is a training that I do with my agency in a really regular way to help support the community in times of stress. So to be able to take this message out to more people and to have more people that have some of this information, I'm really excited about. So what we're going to do today is a very abbreviated version of psychological first aid, or we call it PFA for short. And really, this is a model of early intervention after disaster or crisis. What's really important is that it's not therapy. For those of us that do have kind of therapy and counseling backgrounds, it's very important that we're mindful of the kind of support that we're providing when we're supporting people through these kinds of intense times or during these intense times is not counseling. So we really just like to emphasize that. And the great thing about that is that it means anyone who is a supportive other can provide this kind of support. So it gives us a little bit of a framework. So as I shared, so what we're going to cover today might not feel particularly new, but hopefully the framework and how we put it together might start to feel a little different. So just a quick overview of our objectives today. We're going to talk a little bit about stress and how it impacts all of us. We're going to talk a little bit about what the core principles for supporting ourselves and others during times of high stress are and how we might apply those during a pandemic when some of the things that we might naturally do have to look really different. So that's just a general overview. Again, at any point that you have questions, feedback, please feel free to jump in. So with that, we're going to do a quick biology lesson. I usually joke with people that this is, a brain lesson by a therapist. So take or leave it. But basically, what we want to talk a little bit about is the fact that all of us, when we experience stress, we have physiological reactions. And so stress impacts all of us, whether we like it or not. So before we really kind of dive into what stress does to our brain and to our bodies, I'd love to get some information from you all. Kind of when you think of stress, what does that mean? How would you define stress? Since a lot of what we're going to talk about today is stress, it's important for us to be on the same page about what that is. So how would you describe stress to someone if you were going to explain it to someone?
That's a tough one. I guess just in some ways not being able to connect with reality. You just kind of feel overwhelmed and you're not quite sure how to proceed. I mean, that was my experience this summer. So I went into a situation thinking, oh, I'm a nurse. I can handle this. I know what I'm supposed to do. Well, not. And that was one of the reasons I was attending, one of the many reasons I was attending today. So, you just don't function correctly, not as you normally would. There's all kinds of stress symptoms, and you'll say something and all of a sudden you'll think back, was that really me? It just creates a situation internally and you don't always know how to climb out of that.
Absolutely. I appreciate all that feedback. Christy, do you have anything you would kind of add when you think about what stress is?
Yeah, that what Doris said resonates. And for me, when I'm under stress, it just feels like overload. Like I can't process it. I can't function. I can't be linear, I can't do the steps.
Right.
And you just need to figure out a way to calm down and, do some deep breathing or, to get that overload feeling to stop. Yeah, that's what I would call it, overload.
I mean, I don't love the feeling, but I like that description. That really resonates for me. And I'm sitting here with a big old grin on my face because I'm like, oh, you all are making my job so easy. You have already touched on so many of the points that we're going to cover in just a few minutes. So that's wonderful. I know to pick on you all. So kind of a shorthand version that we'll sometimes talk about is at the core, stress is really fear. It can be fear of something physical. It can be fear of kind of how someone might judge us or might view us. I usually joke, getting up and talking to a group of strangers, there's always a little thought in the back of my head, like, are they gonna think I'm making sense, that I know what I'm talking about? That stresses me out, that kind of fear of what will people think? So at its core, stress is fear. We use lots of different ways to describe it, but if we want a quick kind of one shorthanded definition, that's what we talk about. And as Doris and Christy, you both alluded to, stress changes our thinking patterns. It changes how we process things. And some of that is because of the impact that stress has on the brain. So Doris, you shouldn't have told me you're a nurse, because now I'm totally going to pick on you. So when we think about the body's stress response, what parts of the brain are impacted? Like the way I talk about this sometimes is that, it's not that our brain stops working, but our brain works differently when we're experiencing a stress response, because the blood is going different places in our body. So what are people's thoughts, or what have you heard about parts of the brain that work differently when we're stressed?
I'm not sure I heard you correctly, and so I'm not sure I have an answer for you on that.
Fair enough. That is fine. I'm shameless about putting people on the spot, but it's always okay to say pass, so no worries at all. So we have two pictures of the brain here. So one really just looks at the lobes, whereas the other looks at our limbic system. So what we know about the stress is that when our bodies have a physiological stress response, our limbic system takes over. So we go into what is often called the fight or flight response. What we're going to talk about in just a minute is that it's actually more than just fight or flight. There's other biological responses that are hardwired for us. But one of the things we know is that because our limbic system takes over, these lobes aren't always as active. So one part of the brain that is really impacted by stress is the frontal lobe. And so the way I talk about it sometimes is that our frontal lobe goes offline a little bit. It doesn't work how it normally does. Does anyone know kind of what kinds of things happen in the frontal lobe? Like what things that part of our brain is responsible for?
Executive functioning.
Yes, exactly. Planning, organizing, problem solving. Doris and Christy, you both were talking a little bit about that, about just not being able to maybe to kind of follow through steps or feel like you're thinking as clearly. And those are all things that our frontal lobe helps us with. And those are all things that work really differently for all of us, no matter what our profession is or what our typical stress levels are. So for me, it's often frustrating because it's like during times of stress, those are some of the things that I wish I had the most access to. And yet biologically, that's not how our brains work. That part of our brain really goes offline while our limbic system takes over. Our temporal lobe also acts a little bit differently. And the reason I always like to point this out is that for me, what really resonated is that the temporal lobe is responsible for auditory processing and making meaning. So I think about the fact that when I, as a counselor, support people, a lot of what I do is talk to people. And yet, if people are experiencing high levels of stress, they are not hearing me and processing my verbal interventions in the same way they might normally. So for me, it's a big reminder of when we're stressed, we're not listening the same way, we're not making meaning the same way. Other parts of the brain or other thoughts about parts of the brain that are impacted with stress that you want to share? Those are the two things that I like to point out the most, but invite people to share other information too. Okay. Silence means I'll go on to the next slide. So when our limbic system takes over, we go to we talk about kind of 5 different places. So the first response is the fight response. I think most of us are pretty familiar with this one. We talk about this a lot. This is also kind of the easiest one to see. But when someone's in the fight response, what does that look like? What might you see? How might you know someone's in that response?
Well, my experience is mostly through vital signs. So,
Okay.
you know, being a first responder, that's, we talk a lot about that, but it was mostly um, the vital signs, sometimes the emotional part, but for me, I always depended on the vital signs to really give me a better look at what was going on. And that was mostly a change in what their vital signs usually were.
Absolutely. So what might, well, you said a change. So it can kind of be a change in either direction, I imagine.
It
Um,
it can it can be. It just depends on how dramatic it is.
So if someone, when I think of the fight response, I think of someone who is maybe a little more aggressive with their response. They may be verbally aggressive. I've
Mhm.
seen, or as I'm thinking, you've probably seen some things like this where people are physically aggressive, right? They are
Right.
physically in that fight response.
Right. Or they're
So when,
afraid, and they're physically afraid, and so they respond differently to how you are trying to assist them.
absolutely, absolutely. Such a great point. We're going to loop back around and talk about that a lot in just a little bit. But that's really the whole point of us understanding these responses is that people are going to respond differently to our attempts to help them based on their stress response or their fear response. Exactly. So the fight response is one that most of us are pretty familiar with. It's one of the easier ones as an outsider that maybe doesn't know someone to recognize that, oh, they're in their fight response.
Yeah.
As they may seem angry, escalated, things like that. Another biological response to stress or fear is the flight response. So getting out, escaping. Another response is the freeze response.
Mhm.
The freeze response is really interesting to me. So I always think about this when my dog goes out in the backyard and there's a bunny there and the bunny just freezes. It comes from this point of like, maybe if I don't move, the predator won't see me. What
Right.
we know about the frozen bunny is that the frozen bunny's vital signs are probably pretty escalating. Like the little
Mhm.
bunny heart rate is going really high. So the bunny's vital signs, whether it's in the flight or the freeze response, are all still really escalated. Physiologically, it's responding the same way. It's outward behavior that's a little different. So with people, this really can just look like freezing. It also can sometimes look like dissociating, where people kind of check out. We also talk about a faint response, where people can actually faint because of their stress response. And then there's a fifth response that is a little new that we don't talk about as much, but I think is probably going to feel really is going to resonate with everyone on this call today is the friend response. So our limbic system, when it takes over, one of the natural responses that some of us might have is this friend response, this desire to reach out and connect with other people, whether it's to offer support or to be supported. But that natural kind of connection is also a stress response. We will send you after the training today. We'll make sure Shannon gets it. We'll send you both. There's a training manual for this, and we also have a video by a woman named Kelly McGonigal. She does a really great TED Talk. She is a health psychologist, and she talks about the friend response and talks about how the way we view stress and the way we connect with other people when we experience stress actually changes our body's physiological response to stress. So even though our heart is pumping blood at a faster rate, sorry, Doris, you could do a much better job explaining that. Medical terminology is not the greatest. Our cardiovascular system handles that very differently when we have our friend response and based on how we view stress. So the key takeaways from all of these different responses is that each of these has a survival function. So all of these stress responses are adaptive in certain situations and they can be maladaptive in certain situations. And I think when we're supporting people, one of the most helpful things that I've been able to do is to talk to people about their stress response and really normalize that whatever reaction they had is okay, because that's what our bodies do when we're stressed. That's how we're hardwired to respond to stress. It's what allowed us as humans to survive, because our ancestors had these stress responses and were able to evolve. The other challenge is when our limbic system takes over, we don't get to choose which response is going to be most helpful. Our limbic system automatically makes that response for us. So sometimes we might have a lot of shame or remorse about what we did when we were stressed. And so one of the important things that I try to emphasize with folks is like, you don't get a choice in this. Recognizing that these are natural stress responses, working through them is a way to kind of shift sometimes what our more natural response is. But at the end of the day, because our frontal lobe isn't working the same way it normally does, we don't get to say, hey, I'm in this stressful situation. I would really like to use my friend response right now instead of my fight response. So I've just talked a ton. What thoughts and reactions do you all have? Either ways you've seen this play out. I know for me, I can definitely look back at this and be like, oh yeah, I was in the fight response that day. And then the other day I was in the flight response because I just walked out of the room and was like, I'm done talking right now. But what are your thoughts and reactions about this, and why this would kind of have a place in a course like psychological first aid?
Well, I think sometimes it just takes time, but especially with this past year, not just with COVID, I can relate to all of those phases. And right now, feeling very much in that friend response stage where I've missed not having people around me or people to chat with. And I'm finding myself very Zoom dependent, just for that company. That you need, just to chat, just to see other smiling people and to hear other voices.
Absolutely. It's such a good point that even though we may have our more kind of go-to responses, we cycle through all of these, and there's times when it probably feels adaptive and helpful, and there's times where, I mean, I know certainly I often talk about my daughter. I have a 4th grader, and so our remote learning, when she's had to do that, has sometimes been challenging because we can kind of both butt heads a little bit. So it doesn't often feel productive if we're both in our fight response, but I can take a step back and be like, okay, wait, this is what's going on. Let's take a break and try to come back to this later. So I think, recognizing where you are, recognizing what helps, like you said, Zoom helps with that connection, even though it's not the same. And that, a year from now, you may never want to see Zoom again, but that for now, it's helping. Other
I like
thoughts?
the point. I like the point here of like our limbic system, it automatically chooses the response we go into. And I know sometimes it can be really frustrating when you have your response to a stressor, and then you look back and you're like, why did that happen? Kind of like what you said. So I think it's such a great reminder of being mindful of tools and supports that we'll need for different responses that we have. It's going to be one way to help out with that when it happens.
Absolutely. I think finding some grace and compassion for ourselves and others, and even being able to recognize, oh wait, this is probably their stress response and not necessarily me. I know sometimes helps me. So great. So unless folks have other things they want to share, we'll move on. Hello and welcome, Sherilyn. We are just running through some information. Please jump in at any point with comments, questions, etc. So the way we normally talk about psychological first aid is that it's a model of disaster behavioral health. So this is the kind of work that I do when we support people in the community at my agency after there have been natural disasters or after there have been acts of mass violence. So we often talk about, well, what's the point of this? It's not to process trauma. It's not to avoid someone having a diagnosis or anything like that. The point of it really is that we want to help people increase their function. And what we find is that people's functioning increases as their stress levels decrease. So we just talked about what our brains and bodies do when we're stressed. So now we're going to move into talking about how do we decrease those stress levels so we can get that frontal lobe back online and kind of get back to a place of functioning that's maybe a little more consistent with how we are typically functioning. So there are a lot of different models of disaster behavioral health or early intervention responses. Psychological first aid is one of many. The Red Cross has a model that they use. I've sometimes heard similar models to psychological first aid called stress first aid. So in 2007, some researchers looked at all those different models to try to figure out like, well, what is so? We have all these different models, what really helps people? And they found at the core that no matter what the model was, there were 5 things that all the models had in common. And these were kind of the 5 essential elements. So what we know helps ourselves and others in our lives when we're facing stressful situations is a focus on safety. Safety is tricky because we can't always guarantee or ensure safety. So we often talk about a sense of safety, what helps us feel safe, what are our personal limits and boundaries. If I'm working with kids, I may be talking to them about what the adults in their lives are doing to help them stay safe. What can they do? You know, one of the things I've been really surprised about with my kiddos when they've been able to go back in school, I fully expected them to be very unhappy about wearing masks all day and to come home complaining about it. And they have not complained once about it. And I think a lot of that is because that's a place that they have some ownership and they know they can do something to help stay safe so that they can be in school and they can be around their friends. So looking both at that safety and then what can we do? So that self and community efficacy. I often say there's nothing like a pandemic to really show us all how little control we have over things. And so finding the points that we do have some control, we can be effective, both individually, for our families, for our friends, for our communities, can be really, really helpful. I think Doris and Christy, you both touched upon this a little bit earlier, but even calming responses. We've talked about how when our stress response is activated, our body physiologically responds. We have different vital signs. You know, if Doris took my pulse right now, I bet it's different than before I started this presentation today. So things that can actually calm our physiological response can be very, very helpful in lowering our stress levels. Connectedness. We know that as humans, we are social creatures. And so that connection, whether we're introverted or extroverted, whether we get a lot of meaning from deep conversations with people or more surface level high interactions, we know that connection is really important to us as humans. And so that's one of the things that usually helps all of us tap into our resiliency, is having those connections. And then finally, something that's common among all the models is finding ways to have hope. Hope is a little tricky. We can't make people have hope. I can't, wave my wand and say, poof, Ayla is now hopeful. But what we talk about as doing this work is helping people connect with the ways that they are helpful and helping encourage those kinds of statements, as opposed to, telling someone they should just look on the bright side. We know that that actually does more harm than good. So we want to talk with people about if there are ways that they're hopeful or future oriented or looking forward to things, how do we help them hold on to that? How do we enhance that? So we'll talk a little bit more about all 5 of these as we get into kind of some of the nuts and bolts about psychological first aid. But any general questions about these things?
Not at the moment.
Okay, great. Sorry, I have lots of windows open, so I'm just kind of scrolling through a few things on my screen to make sure I'm not missing somebody. Okay, so we are going to dive into actually talking about the core actions of psychological first aid. So Ayla, I'm going to hand it over to you to take us through a few things.
All right, well, thank you. And before I jump in, I just want to check in with all of our participants and see how everyone's doing and if we should take a quick break or if we should keep going.
I think I know we haven't been at this for quite an hour yet. This is also just a natural break in the material. So if folks do want to step away. Okay.
Okay, all right, keep going. All right. So getting into PFA. So PFA, like we said earlier, is not therapy, but this is a tool that we can use when our frontal lobe is shutting down, and we can use this as a substitute for providing some support for someone who's experiencing stress. It's going to be helpful to remember that it's designed to provide more direct support and intervention for those individuals who maybe are really overwhelmed and stressed and shocked or shut down. And it's going to be really, that stress is going to be impacting their ability to function in the present moment. So this is going to be super helpful for that. And for our next point, we're going to get into contact and engagement. So for contact and engagement, this is going to be the initial contact, and it's going to be focused on how to reach out to people and trying to figure out how to remove that stigma and shame with that initial contact. A lot of people can feel really uncomfortable or maybe even afraid to ask for help or afraid to ask for resources that are available to them. So being able to initiate that contact is going to be really helpful to begin psychological first aid. And just kind of thinking into some simple ways to introduce yourself to other people and engage with them. So I'm going to open it up in the chat. So feel free if you want to write in the chat or if you want to share with the group verbally, that's great. But I just want to ask our group here, what are some ways you've engaged with other people when you try to initiate contact with someone and provide some support? Or maybe how did someone initiate that with you? You can share that too.
A call, a text, you know, well, a lot of times an offer to go for a glass of wine or a cup of coffee, but that provided a challenge this past year. But sometimes I think reaching out isn't always physical. It can be done verbally, you know, you just have to work at that, I think.
Absolutely. And being able to use, text messaging and other forms of communicating and really just letting people know that you are there and you're available, that's going to be super helpful for the initial contact. I see some things in chat. Yep, it says, yes, I text family every day. I'm so thankful for text messaging. It says, I engage people, the way I engage people is different based on my relationship with them. The person is a friend, like Doris said, a call or text works. If not someone I know, if it's not someone I know, I start by stating who I am and why I'm there. Definitely, yep. I know initial contact for me, I've worked in a lot of settings where I've done crisis intervention, and it's interesting that what I've learned is being able to just introduce myself and say my name and say what it is that I do there so that they get some information about me is typically helpful for that initial contact, because it can be kind of awkward for someone to get services from a total stranger. So that's been something that's been helpful for me.
I forgot that I'm in a live webinar.
I'm going to move the.
It's difficult for me to make
Base
contact with
thing.
others as I feel like I'm interrupting them. Yeah, that is a normal feeling actually. It can feel like you're interrupting others when you're wanting to make contact. But kind of also, like we said earlier, that's where we get our support, and we're social people, and it's okay to feel a little uncomfortable about it. And I would also put out there, the person on the other end, they might feel a little comfortable too. So everyone's kind of figuring it all out together. Text those who text, calls, and offer to chat if they want to. Absolutely. Yeah. So
Kayla,
yes,
I was thinking about what Sherilyn said about feeling like I'm interrupting as I jump in and interrupt. I struggle with that a lot too, especially if it's folks that I know are really busy, which is why I think sometimes like texts or emails are nice because you can just say, hey, thinking of you, and people can kind of get back to you when they can. That's been my little workaround, but I relate to that a lot, Sherilyn.
absolutely. So yeah, like in thinking about when we are initiating contact and maybe someone doesn't respond to that contact. And just keeping in mind that people may not respond for a variety of reasons. Sometimes people can feel really overwhelmed. They may still be processing their situation and they might not be ready to engage with anyone at that moment. And that's okay. So giving some space and allowing that person to process it and when they're ready to engage is going to be helpful. And also respecting individual and cultural needs and differences. So like when initiating contact, to be mindful of body language, to be mindful of cultural differences when you're communicating. I know, for example, I worked with a family who, they were a Spanish speaking family, the parents were, but their son could speak English for them. And they like to bring their son into appointments with them to help translate. So I wanted to make sure I was still being respectful of the parents because it was their time to meet with us. So I would still engage with the parents. My body language was still towards the parents, and just making sure that I was allowing them to still lead the appointment with me, even though their son was interpreting. Sorry, I saw something else. My brain doesn't process body language. Yeah, and depending on who we are, we process things differently. Sometimes people really pay attention to body language, and sometimes we pay attention to tone of voice. Maybe we're paying attention to the area that we're in. So it really just kind of depends on where we are in that moment and what our brains are able to process at that time when we're really stressed. Here, which gets me into nap. So, like our fellow here who is taking a nap, the point of nap is to have a non-anxious presence. Although he is incredibly non-anxious, let's try not to fall asleep on people. But because stress and uncertainty is all around when we're dealing with crisis, it's going to be really helpful to bring a non-anxious presence to others. So part of psychological first aid is really going to be based on this. It's really going to be based on our presence and that non-anxious presence that we can offer to the person who is experiencing stress. What are some, and sorry, let me back up. So before we can think about creating that non-anxious presence, it's also going to be helpful for us to know how our bodies respond to stress because we're experiencing stress too. So what are some things that we are aware of, like with our own bodies, maybe some sensations our body gets when we're tense? And you can feel free to share in the chat, or if you want to share with the group, that's fine. But again, my question is, what are some sensations that our body gets when we are stressed? I see my shoulders tense up and I clench my jaw. Rapid heartbeat, yeah. Butterflies and an upset stomach. Brain fog. Mm-hmm.
I'm smiling and nodding because I get everyone.
Yeah. I think brain fog's a good one.
Oh yeah.
I know I just stop and just have to rethink what's going on. Sometimes I can process that quickly and other times it's not as fast.
Absolutely. I know I can understand brain fog. I know one thing I've noticed about me is my chest feels tight. I've had people point out to me when I'm stressed that I'm randomly rubbing my chest. So that's something that I've noticed about me. But yeah, it's really helpful to know how we respond to stress. It says, with brain fog, yep, I can't think of what to do. Yeah, and then even kind of going back to what we were saying earlier, our frontal lobe is shut down. So we're not processing information the way we normally do. But yeah, like knowing how we respond to stress, it's going to be helpful because then we can be self-aware of what we need in those moments. I know for me, when I get really anxious and, I feel like I'm rubbing my chest and I'm picking up these different signs that I'm responding to my stressor, then I can start using maybe some grounding techniques or breathing and what have you to help myself come back down and be present. And we're going to get into some of that later too. But when we are creating that non-anxious presence, our job as the person who's responding to stress or the stressful situation is to remain calm and communicate clearly, even with all the stress and chaos that's happening around us. So there's 3 ways we can do this. The first way to get started is to remind ourselves to breathe, which sounds very simplistic, but it's so important because sometimes we can change our breathing, we can hold our breath in. I always like to remind people that breathing is a portable focus because we take our breathing everywhere with us. So if we need to bring our attention back into ourselves, we can just remind ourselves of our breath and think about how we are breathing. It can be very, very helpful for grounding ourselves. The next would be focusing on the person in front of us. So how are they doing? Are they safe? How are they responding to what's happening around us? And then lastly, reminding ourselves that we cannot fix this person. And depending on the situation, we're not going to be able to fix what's happening with them either. So for instance, we are all experiencing this pandemic right now. We do not have it within our power to fix this pandemic, but we can provide some support with our non-anxious presence if we're assisting other people. So kind of thinking into that and those 3 components I just shared of thinking of ways to breathe and focusing on others, what would you say would be helpful when you're bringing your non-anxious presence to others?
I'm thinking Doris and Christy, with both of your professional experiences you shared, like you've done this before. I know both special education teachers and nurses, you all are gifted at bringing this calming presence, whether you intend to or not.
I think it is helpful to be aware of one's breathing and to always come with that calming presence. And even if you're not necessarily calm on the inside, you are on the outside, and your voice is calm and what you're saying is calm, and you're modeling that to the person.
Really, that modeling and that
Christy,
co-regulation.
yeah, Christy hit the nail on the head. I think it's, if you're calm, you can project calmness. And if you're excited, if you're panicking, then whoever you're trying to help will resonate to that. I mean, they'll exhibit those symptoms too. And so it's, and even though you may be in a situation where it's like, oh my, what am I going to do next? You're thinking through that process. And for a lot of us, that training in special ed or in nursing or first responder training takes over automatically, and it helps you through those initial steps of calming somebody. That's been my experience. It's harder for myself than it is to do it for others, but self-care is a unique challenge.
Oh yeah. Well, and as a responder, modeling, like you said, modeling that calmness, it helps the other people around us kind of feed off of that, and then we can assess the situation in a better headspace than if we weren't.
Mm-hmm.
What does it say here? I can calm others People say I'm calming presence, but I do not know what I do to bring it. You know, Sherilyn, I understand that. I've been told by a lot of people that I'm very calming, and I'm not very self-aware of what it is that I'm doing to bring that calming presence. I think what I try to do is think about what was happening in those moments where people said that I was calm, and try to see if I can bring those actions and behaviors back to the next situation that comes up. So I might not always know what it was that I may have said or done, but I just say, okay, great, I'll keep that in mind.
Well, I'm
Um,
also thinking of what Christy said. I have gotten similar feedback, and I know that on the inside I feel far from calm, but it really is that ability to like tolerate what I'm feeling on the inside, but still project that. And I was really fortunate that when I started doing this work, I had a supervisor who would very deliberately, before I would go do something, would say, okay, remember, take a deep breath, slow your talking, because I talk fast anyway. And then when I get anxious, I talk even faster. So she would give me like specific, it would be like 30 seconds before we'd walk in to do something. She would kind of walk me through a checklist. So I often kind of hear her voice in my head before I do something, like, what would Lori tell me to do?
I would say the final tip for our non-anxious presence is, as a responder, is to model acceptance of the event. It's going to be the primary task that each survivor will need to master. So practicing acceptance. I don't know if anyone here has heard of radical acceptance before. It's a great approach to practicing this. But trying to get an understanding of what's happening and then modeling that acceptance for the people that we're providing that support for.
And I think with the pandemic, especially, we're all going through this in a way. I know sometimes when I've provided support, I have some separation from the stressful situation or the disaster. Right now, we're all dealing with our own escalated stress levels and trying to be supports for people in our lives. And so giving ourselves that space and grace to be able to tolerate that uncertainty. Thanks, Ava. Any other thoughts about this non-anxious presence? I usually say to people, like, if you're only going to take 2 or 3 things from today's training, like this is one of the things I would say can be such a game changer for a lot of us. Okay. So we are gonna move into doing an exercise. So if you can use the annotate function, feel free to use that. You can also put things in the chat. You can also just say things out loud. We can be really flexible. We're a small group today. But what I want us to do is we have the alphabet in front of us, but I would like everyone to think for just a minute about what are things that either calm you or comfort you that begin with each letter of the alphabet. So what we're going to do together is to try to fill out this whole alphabet by thinking of something for each of these letters that can be calming or comforting for us or for people we know. So the annotate function again is up at the top of this screen. If you want to click on the little pencil that says annotate, you can choose text and you can type something in. So I know this is more my kids, but going to the zoo and watching animals is very comforting and calming for them. And we've transitioned to watching some animal on computers sometimes when we can't go to the zoo in person. So take a peek at all these letters and think about some things that are comforting and calming. Either put it in the chat, come off mute and holler, or type something in. Crafting, yep, I like that. Christy, I am seeing you're trying to put something by B. I can't quite make it out because I have so many things open on my screen.
It says breathing.
Breathing, yes, absolutely. Such a huge one. Reading books. Mm-hmm. So this is a little self-serving because it's gonna be something I talk about in a minute. But limiting media exposure can be calming for me sometimes.
This is Doris. I'm just not working it right, but under G, for G, I'd put gardening.
Love it. I'll type that in. Gardening. Oh, maybe I'll type that in. That's awkward. I see hiking. I see Sherilyn in the comments said exercise. That's a great one for E for some folks.
And oh, anything outdoors for me is calming. Snowshoeing, skiing, walking, just as long as it's outside, bird watching.
I'm putting snow
Oh,
based
snow.
on our
Thank
earlier
you.
conversation. Doris loves snowy days in ways that not
I do.
everyone
Yeah.
does.
Golfing, anything that's outside works.
Outdoors. One of the people that I sometimes do this training with often puts down vacation.
Mm-hmm. Getting
Oh.
away from it all.
So when you look at all of these, what are some thoughts when you think about, okay, we know that calming and comforting is an important part of supporting ourselves and others in times of stress. And we have all these different things on the screen. What comes up for you? What reactions do you have? What do you notice? Like, why would we take time to do this?
We enjoy them. They bring us peace of mind.
Uh-huh. So knowing what we enjoy is really important because as we talked about when we're stressed, that frontal lobe not working the same way. So it's sometimes hard to remember. People will often ask me, and I ask people too, like, what would help right now? And sometimes I'm like, I don't know. I can't even think of what would help. So being able to know some of these things before our stress levels are high can be helpful. Absolutely. What about when you look at this list? Is every single thing on here something you find calming? Okay. Seeing
I don't know
yes.
about you all. Exercise doesn't feel calming for me. It feels like stress.
That's a great point. Yeah, for some folks, exercise is huge and that helps people calm down. For other people, exercise can be a source of stress. And so recognizing that there's differences. What I find calming may not be the same thing that Doris finds calming or that Ayla finds calming. And so really recognizing that when we are supporting people and helping them think through what would help, that we might offer some suggestions if they're not able to think of things, but that this is very, very individualized. I think about snow. Like I have some family members that snow is not at all calming. Or my mom, she grew up in Miami. Snow is not her thing.
Yep.
So she would look at this list and be like, do not show me snow when I'm stressed. But we know Doris does like the snow. The other thing I think about, especially with the pandemic, is that we do have to acknowledge that some of the things that we might normally find comforting have to be different right now or may not be as accessible to us, like vacation. That looks really different right now. And it's not necessarily something we can do. You know, I already talked about the zoo and my kids really liking watching animals, and we haven't been to the zoo and I don't know how long. So we've adapted that and started watching some of those live animal cameras because that's been fun for them. So recognizing that sometimes we just need to adapt things. Reading's another one. Like I'm a big reader and I've noticed the kinds of things I can read, or that mental fog we've been talking about, that sometimes that makes reading hard. So knowing what alternatives we have can be really helpful, or being able to talk with friends and family about alternatives can help. Other thoughts before we move on? Okay, thank you all for doing that with me. So just a few points. We kind of talked about this and we did the exercise, and now we're going to share some of the content. So we know that safety and comfort are really important components of helping people manage stress. If we do not feel safe, it's going to be really hard for our body to stop responding with its stress response. So we need to do what we can to feel safe and to promote a sense of safety, while acknowledging that in most situations, there's not a way to 100% guarantee safety. I think a pandemic is particularly challenging because there's so many different levels of behaviors that can be risky. There's different comfort levels with that. So I think one of the things that I really talk with folks a lot about is what feels safe to you and really acknowledging that and being okay with that, if that's different than what feels safe for Ayla, right? So we can all have those differences, but what is going to help us calm our stress response is figuring out what is going to help us feel safe. Sometimes a part of safety, oftentimes a part of safety is thinking about our media exposure too. There's lots of information out there about how the 24-hour news cycle and where we're getting our information from can actually impact our stress levels. For me, one of the things I really hold on to is that they did some research after September 11th, and they found that some kids who did not live in New York had just as many, if not more, trauma symptoms after 9/11 than kids who were in New York at the time of the 9/11 attacks. And what they were able to realize is that for the kids that weren't actually in New York, they watched it on TV. And they think that because it was on TV over and over again, they found that kids who watched TV exposure to it thought the attacks lasted longer and that more people, more buildings were impacted than actually were, because cognitively they didn't have the sense to recognize it had happened and it was over, because they were just exposed to it over and over again. So even though there was huge distance, the exposure through media seemed to impact people's experience. And so I really want to encourage folks to think about what your media habits are, how that impacts you, and give yourself some space from that if it is impacting. I will often tell people that I think I do a really good job with this, and every once in a while my husband points out to me that I may not be doing as good of a job. He'll say, hey, you've been watching the news for a little bit. You seem kind of worked up. Do you need to take a break? So sometimes people in our lives might remind us of this too, but giving yourself space with media can be really helpful. Other thoughts about safety and comfort and why those would be a part of a model like this? Okay. So we've been going for about an hour now. We do not have kind of a long break built into today, but I want to acknowledge that people may need warm up of beverages or to run to the restroom. So we can either go another 5 minutes and then take a 3-minute break, which I know is just really quick, or we can take a 3-minute break now. What are people's preferences? We'll want to go through just a little more content or take a break now. Okay, Doris.
I'm good.
You're good? Okay.
Mhm.
I'm okay. Thank you, Sherilyn. We are glad you're here. Okay, great. Well, we'll do a little more content and then we'll take a quick break. Get a warm up on your tea or coffee. So now we're going to move into stabilization. So when we talk about psychological first aid, we're going to kind of cover 9 areas today. Not everyone is going to need everything that we're going to talk about today. Stabilization is one of those things that if I'm thinking Doris and Christy, again, you've both probably seen and needed to use this before, but probably not with every single person you've interacted with. When people need that stabilization support, it's really clear. And so what we're talking about, a time that stabilization might be helpful, is when someone isn't oriented. And what we talk about is like, do they know where they are? Do they know what's going on? Do they know who they are? Do they have a general sense of time? I giggle a little bit about that one because I think we've all struggled a little bit in the pandemic with like, wait, what day is this? Like, there's just not as much variety in days as some of us had in the past. So, but just thinking about if folks aren't oriented to where they are and what's going on, that's a concern, and we want to address that right away and see if we can help them get back into the present moment. One of the things that we often talk to people about is that your reaction, whatever your reaction is a really normal, natural, understandable reaction. It is the situation we're living through, the disaster, the stressor that is abnormal. So if you're more tired or you're not sleeping well, those are both perfectly normal reactions to living through a pandemic. If you feel more productive or you just don't feel like you have any energy to do anything, those are both normal reactions. It's a pandemic that is abnormal. So that's sometimes what we do to help frame with people, kind of that their reaction is pretty understandable given the high levels of stress. We want to be mindful of any sort of extreme reaction. So I already talked about if someone doesn't know kind of where they are or what's going on, that's going to be a concern. If someone's extremely panicky, if someone is, we all kind of experience brain fog during times of stress, but there's also a difference between someone being really, really confused. So we want to be mindful of any extreme reactions. And one of the things we might do is help people ground or kind of come back to the present moment. So there's lots of different exercises for this. Again, Doris and Christy, you were so nice to introduce yourselves and give us some background. I know that you, from your experience, have some examples. Ayla is going to walk us through one example, and then we'd love to hear from anyone if there's other things that you do to help either yourself get in the moment or help others get in the moment if they're having a hard time.
Yes. So the example I'm going to give us today for our exercise is going to be the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And this is one of the grounding exercises we were talking about. So the goal of a grounding exercise is to help bring this person back into their present moment and provide some stabilization for them. This is helpful because it helps orient them to their surroundings, to how they're feeling, what's happening around them. I've done this exercise with a lot of people I've worked with, and it's been very helpful. So for this exercise, we would ask them to look around and find 5 things they see, 4 things they feel, 3 things they hear, 2 things they smell, and 1 thing they taste. And we can actually even practice this. I'll walk us through one of the points here. The great thing about this exercise is you can even modify this so you don't have to do all 5. If you want to pick and choose which one you'd prefer to do, that's fine as well. So I'm just going to ask all of us, wherever we are, if you can sit in a comfortable position or whatever position you're in right now. If it's comfortable, you can stay there. And I'm just going to ask us to take a deep breath in through our nose and out of our mouths. And while you have that normal breathing, I'm going to ask us to listen for 3 things we can hear. We're going to come back. What are some things you noticed when you gave yourself a pause just to listen to what was around you? I see, Sherilyn, you said background sound. Yeah, we notice things in our background. I know I noticed a car that was driving down the street, and I probably wouldn't have noticed otherwise. Fridge running.
My phone was pinging. I didn't shut it off.
Yeah, that's one of them, the phone ringing.
Noise canceling.
Noise canceling headphones. All right. Oh, good.
No, go ahead, Ayla.
No, I was just going to ask what else anyone else may have noticed. I know I've done this exercise with quite a few groups, and it's always interesting for this particular exercise when we listen to what's around us. It can be helpful in some ways because we allow ourselves to come into our space, and a lot of times when we hear random noises around us, we can become really agitated about noise. But when we set out to purposely listen to what's around us, it can sometimes have the opposite effect because we're trying to become more attuned to what's around us. So this can be a helpful exercise. Yes, it is interesting. We are going to, Amber, were we taking that break now or?
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and take the quick 3-minute break now? Because I'm just afraid we'll get too far and then we won't do it at all. We'll run out of time. So according to my watch, it is exactly 11:11. So if folks could do what you need to do for just a few minutes and then be back here, kind of back on camera, give us the I'm ready signal by 11:14, that would be great. Thank you. I see Ayla, backdoors back. Sherilyn and Christy, I'm not sure if you are back. If you want to either wave or put something in the text real quickly, or the chat, I guess. Oh, so many names for different things. See Christy back. Sherilyn, if you are back, can you put something in the comments really quick? I think we're gonna get started, but it would feel better knowing you're here. It's all about me. Oh, I see the applause. Wonderful. Thank you, Sherilyn. Take it away, Ayla.
All right. Well, our next piece to psychological first aid is information gathering. So for this part, it's important to remember that we are not doing a clinical assessment. This is really more about active listening and creating a conversation that can help support this individual that we are interacting with. So kind of thinking first into current needs. I like to think of this more around like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. But what are this person's basic needs? Has this person eaten in a while? Have they not been sleeping lately? What are, like I said, what are their basic needs, and are those things being met? I know in my experience of working with crisis intervention, I had a much more difficult time supporting someone who didn't have these basic needs taken care of. And once I was able to address them, even if I couldn't provide some of these things that they were needing, just addressing them was really helpful in the conversation. So checking into how their basic needs are doing, or how they're going, and allowing it to be conversational. Like we said, it's not a formal assessment. Asking open-ended questions is going to be really helpful. A question that I know has been helpful is, would it be helpful to talk about what you've been through? Because sometimes it's not. Sometimes it would be more helpful to talk about, something else that would be, a change in topic for them. Maybe they've been thinking about that issue for a lot of their day, and they just want to break from talking about it, which is totally fine. So asking if it would be helpful to talk about what they've been through, or what would be helpful to you right now. I know I've asked that question quite a bit when I've worked with someone, and sometimes their answer is, I just need to go take a shower. All right, well, go do that, and then we will meet back later. So kind of checking in and seeing where they're at, and what would be helpful to them in that moment. And then being supportive, it's going to be helpful to allow that person to guide that conversation. Not going into the conversation with our own agenda, even though we might have some information we're going to need to pull out of it, but letting that person really lead with that conversation. Maybe they haven't spoken to anyone in a while. I know with some of the services we've given over Zoom, and some of the peer services we've given, it's been really helpful to allow people who check in to lead some of those conversations. And sometimes it goes in the direction that I was planning, and sometimes it doesn't. But either way, it was still supported. So allowing that to happen. And being mindful to listen for some major points that they might be sharing. So if there was a traumatic loss, that happened, if there's an immediate threat that's happening that needs to be addressed, and other traumatic experiences that they're going through, if there's a separation or illness, if they're experiencing some issues with substance use. So really just kind of listening for where their needs are, and just kind of taking it from there. And also just being mindful of some things that might be on our radar naturally. I know for some of us in our group who've worked with others, just being aware of that person's behavior, if there's any behavior changes that you haven't normally seen for this person, if they're disoriented or if they're confused, if they're extremely withdrawn or shut down. So being mindful of those major changes in behavior is going to be helpful, and then figuring out how we can be supportive from there. And really just giving a listening ear. I've always liked to remind some people that I've worked with, like, we can talk about what's happening, and if you want me to give you feedback, I can, but if you want me to just sit here and listen, I can do that too. And sometimes just offering that person to just be there and listening to what's happening can be really helpful for some other people. So those are going to be some extra points we can take away for psychological first aid as far as information gathering. And then before we jump into our next point, I just want to open it up. Have you all experienced, or what would be your experiences with sort of connecting with others and getting some information to help support them?
For me, there's often more that people have going on than I can support with. So even just knowing where to start.
One of the things I do that I've experienced through the years is, as a part of opening the ears, is the eye contact. And when I start the conversation is to maintain that eye contact. And I find as the eye contact goes on, they open more and more because they know they have my undivided attention. Now, that situation can be a little different sometimes than a lot of others' experiences, but I find it works even in socializing with a lot of people at this time.
Definitely, thank you. I know, and the eye contact is it's helpful because it helps them know that you're engaged with them. So that is such an important part of communicating.
For me, this looks a little bit different depending on if I have a relationship with someone or not. Again, using my daughter as an example. I may check in with her and say, hey, it seems like you're having a hard time. Is there something that would help? And sometimes she can say, yeah, I just need to do this. Can you help me? And sometimes she'll be like, I don't even know what would help. And so when she's at that point, I know that I want to start checking in with her, like, have you eaten? Have you, like, there's kind of some things that I know in general, if she hasn't done, that those will help her kind of get to a different place. Whereas if I'm working with someone that I don't have that kind of relationship with, then it is going to be much more of an open-ended conversation as opposed to kind of pointed questions.
Looks like we have something in our chat asking questions like, what do you want to do about it? They already know the answer to the situation. Yeah, letting that person take the lead, and just verbalize what it is that they think would be helpful can be a great way to provide support.
Absolutely. People often know what they need, and it's just kind of having that space and that invitation to think about it. Absolutely. Ayla can attest to this. I often start conversations with, what would be helpful today? What can I do to be a support? Instead of making assumptions.
Absolutely. Well, Amber, I will pass it off to you.
Thank you. So just a few little caveats. Ayla touched on a lot of these, so I will go through them pretty quickly. Things that we want to make sure we get immediate attention for, whether this is a connection in our personal life or some more formal kind of setting. If people are having thoughts of suicide or making plans to end their life, that is something we want to make sure we get support for immediately. If we have concerns about people's ability to care for themselves or for their children, that's another one that needs support. It's not a common reaction. Like, a lot of people experience high stress situations and kind of get back to their typical functioning, but sometimes it can take a little bit longer. So if during that space they're not doing the things that they need to do to take care of their basic needs, that's something we want to attend to and get help for. Anger and frustration are very, very common reactions to situations like this. At the same time, that there's a difference between having thoughts of really wanting to hurt someone as opposed to just being angry about the situation or mad about how things are. So we want to be mindful of that. If we're hearing anything that sounds like older adult or at-risk adult abuse or any sort of domestic violence, we want to make sure we get support for folks there, and the same with child abuse. And my bias for this is that if I think any of us who are going to be helpers for people in our lives, we really want to make sure that we are comfortable talking to people about these difficult, uncomfortable conversations. So for me, even as a trained counselor, it's not always comfortable to ask people if they're having thoughts about ending their life or thoughts of harming themselves in some way. So really having some training and support around having those conversations and knowing what to do if someone says yes is really, really important. There's a lot of models out there that are often referred to as gatekeeper models that don't teach you how to do a full intervention the way a behavioral health professional would, but really do teach any of us skills for how we have these conversations with people in our lives. So some gatekeeper models of training might be something called QPR, which stands for Question, Persuade, Refer, which is offered by a lot of places. All Health Network sometimes offers that training to the community. There's also things like Safe Talk. There's an online training from Living Works called a START training, where you can go and do an online training to get some comfort in asking questions and knowing what next steps are. So I just really recommend that people do things to feel comfortable with that. Another really great training, if it's something that's available to you, is called Mental Health First Aid. It is often done in person, but they have made some modifications so it can be done online. And what Mental Health First Aid does is really talk about some of the common mental health issues that people might face, and what to do. So if we have someone in our life who seems really depressed, or we have someone in our life who seems really anxious, and we're worried that they might have a generalized anxiety disorder, or that they might have a depressive disorder, this gives us some of that information and some next steps and helps us with our comfort in talking about that. Some other things I recommend we all, just as people, know about is that in Colorado, we have the amazing resource of the Colorado Crisis Line. It is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week line where folks can call or text if they want to talk to someone. It is called a crisis line because regulatorily it needs to be called that, but really it's counselor people like me, is what I often say when I'm working with folks, that are really there to talk to folks if they are not sure what's going to help. So they are always going to ask questions about safety and make sure everyone's in a safe place, because that's kind of their first and foremost job. But from there, then it really is about what would help you in the moment. So you're having a hard time sleeping, it's 2 a.m, you're feeling really overwhelmed and really worried. You might be a resource to help you think through what could help. You're really worried about your friend because they don't seem like they've been eating or sleeping, and they seem more withdrawn, and you're not sure what to do or how you might help them. They could talk to you there too. So it doesn't just have to be a crisis to call them. We do in Colorado have a statewide hotline for making child abuse reports, so you don't have to figure out which county or things like that. So I think that's an important number for us all to know about. And then if we are worried about people and we can't connect with them, it's helpful to know that law enforcement can do something called welfare checks. I know sending law enforcement to people's house is a big deal, and that is not always helpful in every situation. I think at the same time, knowing that if you can't get a hold of someone and you're worried about them for very specific reasons, that you can call the non-emergency number for your local law enforcement and request a welfare check, and they will go and see someone. We also in our area are fortunate that we have a lot of co-responding teams. So there's teams like the Douglas County Sheriff's Office has one. I think Castle Rock Police Department has one, where it's a law enforcement official and a counselor. So if there is some sort of behavioral health support that would help, people can get that connection there too. We also have something called CIT officers here in Colorado, and that stands for Crisis Intervention Training. And those are officers who have additional training in mental health and substance use disorders and supports than an officer might have if they're typically. So people that just have a little more information and background in that. And then for any sort of older adult abuse report concerns, we go through our county law enforcement or our county Department of Human Services would be the place to get older adult services involved. Any questions about these resources? In my experience, it's pretty uncommon to need these. And when you need them, it's really stressful to not have them, because again, our brain responds to stress. And so trying to think through in the moment what to do if we're worried about someone's safety can feel really hard if we haven't thought about it ahead of time. Okay. Ayla, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about practical assistance.
Yes, so practical assistance, getting into problem solving for those immediate needs. So like we kind of hit on it earlier, those Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What does this person need in this moment that would be helpful to them? And again, being aware that we're not going to be able to solve all of this person's immediate needs, but sometimes addressing those could be helpful in the conversation too. Also being mindful that, again, the frontal lobe shuts down during crisis and really stressful situations. So being mindful of how we're providing information to this person, not giving too much information at once. I know it's also been helpful to ask, is there another person that you want to make sure we give this information to, just in case you have some questions later, you have another person who's in that conversation as well. Can be really helpful. When possible, facilitate the other person taking action. So that's going to be really encouraging self-efficacy and encouraging this person to step into problem solving and stepping into getting things done within their own capacity. And that's going to be helpful with building their confidence. So as much as some of us natural caretakers like to step in and solve things for them, it's actually more beneficial if they can solve it for themselves. So being that person to support them and saying, I'm here for you if you need support, if you have questions, but really encouraging them to do this on their own is going to be more beneficial to them in the long run. And do not do for someone what they can do for themselves. Something that they definitely hammer into us in the human service field. But yeah, like I said, promoting that self-efficacy and really providing that support and encouragement that the person's looking for when they're trying to step into problem solving for themselves.
Yeah, and I would just piggyback on that, that it's such a hard one. Like, it makes perfect sense when I talk about it here. I'm always like, oh yeah, it's good for people to take action for themselves. But in the moment, you're there trying to be a support, and it's so tempting to offer to do things for people. And we actually know it helps people get back into their frontal lobe and get that cognitive functioning back if they can take some actions themselves. The other thing we often talk about is if you suggest something or you make a plan with someone, like if Ayla and I talk and she suggests, like, you know, Amber, would it help if you did X, Y, and Z? And I say, yeah, I can do that. And then I connect with Ayla again and I haven't done any of that. That gives Ayla some information that I might not be ready for that. And so she can always kind of take a step back and try something different. But we always want to assume that folks are going to be able to take some action and really support them in taking action for themselves. Back over to you, Ayla.
Right. Sorry, I had a hiccup. Zoom was trying to log me out.
Oh no.
Can you still see
If
me?
you need to connect, we can see you.
Do
If
you
want
mind
me to-
taking this over? Because I think it's logging me out.
Yes, I could do that really quick. We'll see you when you get back.
Okay.
Okay, I see a comment from Sherilyn. What if they didn't take action? That's really gonna depend. Ayla will attest to this. That's my answer to just about everything. I think it depends what it is. Like, sometimes I'll talk with folks about, you know, what do you think would help? And they might say, you know, I have a friend I haven't reached out to in a while. I think I'll give them a call. And if they don't take action around that, I might not be super concerned. I might ask them, like, do you think there's someone else that might be easier to reach out to, or something else that might be more helpful? So I might kind of just problem solve with them. Is there something else? Like, did that maybe not feel like the most helpful thing when you went to do it in the moment? So do we switch gears? If it was a plan around them, you know, getting some food or getting some of their basic needs met, and they weren't able to take action around that, I would have more concern about that. And I would probably be a little more directive, or might think about, are there other people in the person's network that I can pull in to really help make sure that need gets met? Does that kind of help, Sherilyn? I know that's really general. Yes, okay, great. And I think Ayla's gonna pop back in. I will, until I know that she's good and connected, I'll just keep talking through this and she can let us know when she wants to take over. But we talked a little bit about this already, connection with social support. As people, we are social people. It doesn't matter if we're introverted or extroverted, if we like talking to lots of people or just one or two people, we are social. And so one of the things that disasters do is really disrupt our connections with other people. So if we want to be a support for people, one of the most important things we can do is help them connect with their natural resources. I talk about this a lot because I'll sometimes do this work in person. And so while I want people to feel comfortable and to feel like they have a connection with me, they may never see me again. So me being their social support is not always super effective. Something that I can do that really helps in the longer run is helping them figure out how can they connect with other people in their natural environments. What are some other places where they can get that ongoing connection? So if I do support at school, I may help someone in the moment with X, Y, and Z, and then I make sure they know who their school counselor is. And I do an introduction to the school counselor so that, you know, a month from now, when I'm not at the school anymore, they still know who to connect. Sometimes this takes a little problem solving. As we all know, living in a pandemic, the way we socially connect is very different now than it was last January. So I think we are all unfortunately well-versed in that kind of problem solving and flexible thinking. Other thoughts about connection with social support, things that you've noticed during the pandemic, things that you know are important to you or that you've found effective when you're trying to connect with people?
I have helped some folks who aren't familiar with Zoom or feel like they can't do technology. And, you know, it's sometimes the blind leading the blind, but it is helpful. And they give that feedback that, you know, it wasn't as hard as they thought, or they enjoyed that, or, you know, and so that gives them another way to connect.
Absolutely. Not only that kind of versatility, but you being that non-anxious presence as they're trying out a new skill helps them probably try something new and feel more comfortable. So absolutely. And then I'm thinking, that might help you a little bit in terms of your friend response, right? That might be a way that you manage your stress by supporting other people too. Great. Ayla, was there I don't know that you necessarily heard everything I said, but was there anything else about social support that you want to make sure we cover?
Yeah, for social support, I know it's really helpful to check in with that person to see if there were already some support systems that they've already used in the past. Maybe they're not using them now, but maybe it's helpful to know what has already been helpful to them versus giving them things that maybe they wouldn't really have an interest in. So I know that's been helpful, just seeing what's already worked and seeing if they would be interested in checking into that again. I know another one would be, again, letting that person take the lead. And if there are folks in their community that they are aware of, and maybe they don't have that information, how to contact them, trying to find out how you can help them get in contact with them. I heard you talk about introducing them to other people so that they can continue on their own. So yeah, I think those are some great steps to make for it.
I'm smiling because I unofficially did that yesterday. I was introducing Ayla. Ayla and I share an office, and I was introducing her to the person that was in the office next to us. So in case they were ever in at the same time, they could say hi to each other and meet each other in person. Yeah, and I'm seeing here some great comments in the chat. So Sherilyn was sharing as an introvert, working hard to connect with others, and then having COVID and doing it all, I'm imagining virtually and stuff it feels like it put you back. I'm right there with you. I'm a much more introverted person, and so this kind of shift in communication has been different for me. And Christy, oh, great suggestion. Meetup's another good way to connect with those with similar interests. There's even one for introverts. No way. I had no idea. I think that's definitely something I've noticed, that as I have less of those kind of natural peer groups, it's been harder to connect with others. So that's a great suggestion. Thank you, Christy. So just a little bit more content, and then we're going to put you all on the spot again to talk about kind of takeaways. One of the big things when we're providing other people's support, especially if we're doing it in more formal kind of situation or settings, we want to make sure that we give people information on coping, because again, in the moment, things are helpful, right? I'm talking to Ayla, she's supportive, it feels good, and then it's 2 o'clock in the morning and I can't sleep. What do I do then? So if the opportunity is there that we can give people some information about coping and what to expect and what they might do, that can be really helpful. Again, my first supervisor who helped me learn how to do all of this work would almost always say to people, I guarantee you that sometime within this next week, you are going to lose your keys. You're not going to remember where you put them, and you're going to think you're losing your mind. And I need you to know that you're not. This is what happens after disasters. Our thinking shifts a little bit and it shifts back. So give yourself some grace. So really letting people to know what to expect and what is normal can be really helpful. We also want to, as much as possible, give people information in writing so they can go back to it later. As we talked about earlier, our temporal lobe may be impacted by stress levels. And so even though we're taking in information as people are talking to us, having something to refer back to later is really helpful as well. We will share with you all one of our examples for the Colorado Spirit Program. We have a coping tips sheet, and we have hard copies of them for whenever we can actually give people paper again. So the front of it really is like how to contact us and get in touch with us, and then the back is coping tips. So it kind of serves two purposes. If people wanted to reach out for support, they know how to do it. And if people just want to read some information, they have that too. Linkage with collaborative services is another thing we talk a lot about. We are often, as helpers, kind of short-term resources that are not there permanently. Like sometimes when we talk about supporting our friends and family, were there, but I even think about like my relationships with my kid's teacher, right? Those change each year. So the teacher that I felt connected with and was checking in with, like, how are you doing with all of this? Like, she's not our teacher anymore. So really making sure that people are connected with other ongoing supports in their community, whether that's social supports like Meetup and things like that, or just other agencies who may be able to help meet different needs that might come up, or ongoing opportunities for connection. If we are ever making any referrals, if I'm like, hey, there's this great group that you might be really interested in, if we can write that down for people, that is typically pretty helpful. We don't want to rely on people just remembering everything we talk about. And I'm going to hand it over to Ayla for our last little content bit to talk about respecting limitations.
Yeah, so respecting limitations is going to be so important for us as the person providing support. Being mindful for that individual that if they choose not to take the support that we're offering, that's fine. And just letting them know that it's okay that they're not, interested in the support at that moment. And if they are interested later, they can come back. So that way there's no guilt or judgment from them not wanting to take it at that moment. And just being mindful of our own responses. And, sometimes we can really personalize it when someone doesn't want our support at that moment. But just remembering that it's not about us, it's about that person and where they're at in that moment. And, again, going back to that those stress responders that we have, that person just might not be in a space to really step into moving more towards getting support at that time. And also being mindful that we are meeting people where they're at. So if that person, again, if they're in a place where they're ready to have conversations with us and they want to talk about what it is that's going on, or if they're not, that's fine. And if they need to maybe do some grounding exercises or whatever support they need in that moment, trying to figure out what they need in that moment and meeting them where they are right there. And lastly, remembering to take care of yourself and practicing self-care and doing some check-ins and bringing that non-anxious presence into that situation is going to be so important. In order for us to be a support of others, we need to be in a good place for ourselves. And often if we're not in a good space for ourselves, if we're anxious, if we're not taking care of ourselves, and we can actually do more damage than good. So just making sure that we are practicing a lot of these techniques for ourselves and taking those moments to do some grounding exercises, taking a break, practicing that self-care. It's going to be really important in practicing psychological first aid for others.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I think during the pandemic, this one is it's always true. It's always one I bug people about a lot when I'm working with them. But during the pandemic, we don't have the same distance that we sometimes have when we're supporting people. We're living through this and experiencing our own stress responses and our own reactions too. And so really being honest with ourselves about the space that we're in. Am I in a space today that I can give? And if the answer is no, that's okay. It's okay. I think helpers in general, not me, of course, other people, but helpers in general, we can be really bad at practicing this. So I think what's been really important for me, and I'm very thankful that I have a team that supports me with this too, is recognizing that we don't always have to be on, and it's okay to take a step back, to be able to do things together. When Ayla and I train, it's us and sometimes even another team member training, so we can help each other out gracefully. So if I kind of go off on a tangent and Ayla's looking and realizing, oh no, you're losing people, Amber, you're not making sense, she can jump in and help me. Or last training we did, Zoom just crashed on me. So Ayla, abruptly took over because I just disappeared from the screen. So really being okay, having others support us and partner with us. Thoughts, reactions? Silence means okay, good stuff. Okay. So we are just about done. So we're just going to move into some closing. Grounding exercises and better self-care. I am with you, Sherilyn. I think self-care is something I'm always mindful of. And sometimes I get cranky about it. Sometimes like, I don't need one more thing to do. And it's in those moments when I'm cranky about it that I'm probably kind of most crispy and need to think about, what do I need? Is there support that I could get help with? And yeah, grounding exercises. I will often do grounding when I can't even think straight because I feel like I have so many things coming at me. I will do that exercise that we did. I'll just look around and see what are 5 things I see, what are 4 physical sensations I have, and you can do it really quick. Great. So what we want to invite everyone to do, and I would love, since we're a small group, if folks feel comfortable coming off mute, to just share. First off, if you have any questions about anything we've talked about, feel free to share those, but also kind of what's your biggest takeaway from today? So much like Ayla did at the beginning, I will be a little bit of a pain and go around and call on people just so we don't talk over folks. But Doris, you are the top box on my screen. Do you have any questions? And if not, what is a takeaway for you today?
I no questions. I thought the awareness training was really good. I think for me, it's just remembering that the temporal lobe shuts down, and that's probably part of the problem. And I don't know, I felt like sometimes just going back to basics, being able to accomplish little things, as opposed to trying to think of, that I'd have to chop down a forest before I'd have to be able to kind of regroup myself, so to speak. So I think it's just taking on one little thing at a time to get myself or get someone back to say what was or pretty close to a normal situation.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is absolutely my experience, is that a lot of this is reminders or refreshers for us, but kind of putting it together in the context of like, oh yeah, it is those core actions that help us tap into our resiliency, because anyone we're connecting with has resiliency. They wouldn't still be there connecting with us, right? So it's about how can we support them getting back into it. And it often is those core actions. Thanks, Doris. Christy, you are next on my screen. Any questions? Oops, see, this is what happens inevitably once I mess up the slides here. But any questions? And if not, what is a takeaway for you today?
No, I don't have any questions really. It was a lot of good reminders. And I think things I used to use with the kids I worked with would certainly work with some of the people, some of my friends and the seniors that I work with. And just to remind myself that those things work with all kinds of people. And, I've got a toolkit, and it's about remembering it.
Absolutely. I promise this is not self-serving, but teachers and nurses, I think, are 2 of the biggest groups that I know have these skills, because I see that in my interactions with folks every day. What I think is different is that those professions don't always get the training to know that those are skills. Those aren't just like, just things you inherently know. Those are skills that you all intentionally have developed over the years and use for very real reasons. So yeah, I think sometimes this training just reinforces like, hey, there's a reason that what you're doing is so effective. Look at you being skillful. And Sherilyn, I don't know if you're able to come off mute and share verbally, or if you want to share in the comments, but would love to hear certainly if you have any other questions or thoughts, but what's a takeaway for you?
Can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I agree with everything that's been said completely. And I also appreciate the information gathering questions. Anyway, I'm anxious to kind of review those and try to get them into my mind. So when situations come up, I can use those. My sister recently had an extreme case of, I forget what the term is, but her kidney caused her brain to be dysfunctional. And we had to call in a welfare check, and it was disastrous. I need to use those questions as follow-up because she was completely out of her mind and I didn't know what to do. So I feel much more confident now having this information just in working with her in the future.
I think kind of framing what would help as she's kind of going through her recovery process. And then even
Yes.
someone's ability to engage with you is information gathering, right? Like I'm thinking if she wasn't making sense, you know, she might not have been answering the questions people gave, but that was information that was different for her and that something serious was going on and she needed.
Yes. So this is very helpful. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And Shannon, I see you put in the comment that your takeaway is it's about that person, not me. It's hard to remember that. I am with you. I have, you know, sometimes it's I can hold that in the front of my mind and sometimes it's not. I joked earlier that I have Post-it notes reminding me to breathe, and I also have some Post-it notes reminding me to put things in perspective and remembering it could be the other person's stress response that I'm seeing as opposed to anything that I'm doing. Absolutely. So just in closing, we really want to thank you. Thank you all for being here and being so participatory. As you can tell now, you know, Ayla and I just talking at you is not particularly helpful or interesting. So really, really appreciate your time and your participation and your engagement with us. Would love to just let you know that Colorado Spirit as a program is here to be a support for our community. So if there are things that would be helpful, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We can communicate with you via email. You can call us at that number, 720-707-6789. We have a web page that you're welcome to look at for resources. It has a contact form on it. So if you want to fill that out, someone can follow up with you. If connecting individually would be helpful, we're happy to do that. If there's people in your lives that you think would benefit from information about opportunities to connect with us, we invite you to share that. We have lots of social media stuff that we post, both resources and sometimes some talks and presentations that folks can watch on Facebook. So we invite you, if any of that is helpful, or even if you're not sure what would help, to please reach out and we'd be happy to kind of chat with you both on an individual level or any kind of community level. And then I'm going to hand it over to Ayla to just do a quick run through of some of the groups we have.
Yeah, so as you all can see here, we have some groups happening as well as a drop-in hour. So just giving you all some information of some services that we currently have going. You can feel free to check out our Facebook page or our website for some more information as well as links. So you can feel free to join our groups. And you can also share this with others that you think might be interested as well. Our Keep the Calm at Home and Dedication in a Distance can be great for our parents and our older adult caregiver support group. It's one that I'm running. It's for caregivers for older adults. So if it's a personal, professional support that you're providing, you're welcome to join us. Our Tuesday Talks occurs every Tuesday on Facebook Live. So you'll get to meet more people on our team. And we cover different topics with self-care and mindfulness. And we always offer some sort of short self-care grounding activity as well. And our free Zoom wellness drop-in, it's going to be twice a week. So if you'd like to meet with someone on our team, we keep that hour open for both of those days, and you can check in with one of our crisis counselors and get some support, as well as some resources.
Are there questions, other information we can provide? Do you know of links to resources in other states? That is a great question. I'm so glad you brought that up. So Colorado Spirit is a grant-funded program, and there are Colorado Spirit teams throughout the state. the grant that actually the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment has is a grant from FEMA. And so there are programs throughout the country. There is not a great organized way to know that, but we have had some luck talking with our regional contacts at the state level to figure out if there's programs in other states. So Sherilyn, you're welcome to drop us an email, or if you want to share, well, I don't want you to share your email address because we're recording this, I know. But if you want to reach out to the Colorado Spirit team via email, or if you just want to let us know what state you're looking for, Ayla and I can kind of follow back up with Shannon and see if we can get you some information about another state. Okay, wonderful.
Thank you
Other
guys so
thoughts?
much for taking the time and sharing all that great information.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for having us. It's great to have the opportunity to connect with folks. And it's very clear to me that you all care and are huge supports to people in your lives. So it is an honor to hopefully give you a little space and support and to hopefully help you feel like you have some tools. Well, you have lots of tools for you to really pinpoint those tools and know what you're doing that's so effective. Great.
We hope you guys have
Thank
a
you very
fab
much.
rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming today.
Thanks.
Take care.